was a temperate evening in February when I felt some pains when I was sleeping. I woke up, came down the stairs, and I felt pressure on my chest. Within a matter of minutes, we called an ambulance and I was being rushed off to my local hospital. I felt feelings of anxiety. I felt that there was a danger, that harm could come to me. I wanted to know what was happening, but at the same time, adrenaline was working through me. I sensed that I was feeling fear.
Great bowling. Excellent. Well, we thought it was a good bouncer. The previous one he gave me, but that...
Now, of course, it wasn't the first time that I'd been afraid inside an ambulance. For me, I have to go back to when I was 14 and I was playing cricket. And I loved cricket. I loved the smell of the grass. I loved the sunshine. I loved the noise that the bat would make when the ball would hit it. I loved the smell of the ball. And yet I knew that the ball itself was quite dangerous. Even though it's made of cork with leather and it's got the stitching around it, and it might feel like it's not dangerous, when it's coming very, very fast and hitting you in any part of your body, it can cause serious damage. In fact, there was a guy called Phil Hughes, an Australian cricketer. During a cricket match, the ball hit him in the back of the neck, and sadly it killed him. Now, I wasn't to know this when I went out as a 14-year-old to play cricket, and I faced this much older boy who was bowling towards me, but he was nervous. You see, the umpire, who's a bit like a referee, he told him to be careful how he bowled the ball so that it wouldn't hurt me. He got confused and he bowled the ball as fast as he could straight at my head. And I kind of tried to weave out the way, but the ball came straight at me, smacked me in the eye and broke my cheekbone. I remember the crushing pain. I remember falling into a ball and being carried across into my car, and the car took me off to an ambulance and then across to hospital. And I felt panic. I felt all of this confused mixture of emotions that together we call fear. I could have taken you to so many other places, including my first driving lesson, or maybe when I was chased by a gang when I was about 14 years of age. All of these things had the same thing in common though, that feeling inside of nervousness, my heartbeat accelerating, my hands getting sweaty, my mind struggling to be able to cope with the enormity of what's going on. Sometimes it would lead to me feeling angry. Other times it would lead to a denial that I was even in any kind of danger at all. But all of them had that same thing in common, experience that you and I have all know too well, fear. In doing these talks, I'll be upfront with you straight away. Fear still makes me scared. Even talking about fear makes me scared. And I imagine you might feel the same way. Sitting down, hearing about a talk about fear might turn you off completely and you might feel very uncomfortable. You might want to, like I sometimes feel, think of a world where there's nothing to be afraid of, no dangers, no reason to fear. But the thing is, fear actually makes sense. In the book of Genesis chapter 3, we'll look at 4 reasons why it makes sense. You see, it makes sense for us to fear because the Bible tells us that it makes sense. If we go to Genesis chapter 3 verses 16 to 19, we're going to come across 4 things that happened after God punished Adam and Eve. See, the world was never meant to be the way that it is now. The world was never meant to be a fearful place. But now there are 4 reasons for us to be afraid. We come across them in the passage, and I want you to look out for them as I read the passage. Look out for why the world is now dangerous in a way that it wasn't before. Look out for why the world is now more difficult than it was before. Look out for why the world becomes a disappointing place. And look out for how the world becomes a place where we don't feel that we have any control anymore. We sense things that are out of control. Let's get into the passage. Genesis 3, 16 to 19, and it says, "Then God said to the woman, I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth. And you will desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you. And to the man he said, since you listened to your wife and ate from the tree, whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. All your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it. It will grow thorns and thistles for you, though you will eat of its grains. By the sweat of your brow will you have food to eat, until you return to the ground from which you were made. For you were made from dust, and to dust you will return. Do you notice how, firstly, life is dangerous now? Do you notice how there are thorns and thistles? In verse 18 it says, it will grow thorns and thistles for you, though you will eat of its grains. Now we understand that now. When we live in this world and we work, life is sometimes dangerous. It's frightening. Bad things happen. Like the thorns and thistles that would cut Adam when he would reach out for his grain, he would get cuts. It also says, you will return to the ground in verse 19. So dangerous that all of us now, at some point or other, die. We know that no one learned to walk without falling over, and we learn and we understand life as being about mistakes and difficulties and challenges that lead to us learning when we overcome them. But you know, the way things were, it was never meant to be that way. But now, as part of life, we understand the world as a dangerous place. So that's one reason why fear makes sense. Secondly, do you notice how life is difficult now? In verse 16 it says, in pain you will give birth to the woman. And it says to the man, by the sweat of your brow. Do you see how both of those things involve stressful, hard work? It's tough to get by in life nowadays. Have a think about your own life. Think about the dangers you experience. Also think about the difficulties that you experience. Isn't life sometimes just really tough? In verse 20 it says, you will struggle. And we do struggle, don't we? Let's have a look about why the world is also a disappointing place. It says the ground is cursed, and that we'll return to that cursed ground. Life can be disappointing, and our hopes can be built up and then crashed in an instant. And that's because the world, as it stands, is cursed rather than blessed. Sometimes we say, I can't believe it, everything's been so difficult for me. It's almost like the world's cursed. Yes, it is. The Bible helps us to understand those deep feelings that we experience. Sometimes life seems so unfair, as if someone's out to get me. It's like everything's against me. In one sense, yes, the world is against us, because it's part of God's curse placed on the world. That's why we feel let down. Finally, we feel like the world is out of control in some way. We like to think of us being the people that are in control of everything, the masters of our own destiny. But it doesn't work that way. And you notice in the passage it says, you will struggle, you will eat, you will return. It's you will. And God tells us what will happen to us. It's God dictating our future. It's God saying that He is in control, not us. Of course, He always was in control, even before Adam and Eve rebelling. But this is Him saying, I will dictate what happens, and I will show you that you are not the God that controls your own destiny. In Proverbs 19 verse 21, it says these words, you can make many plans, but the Lord's purpose will prevail. Prevail means it will continue no matter what. That's saying no matter what our plans are, God's plans will come about. Because it's not us who's in control, but God who's in control. The pilots of the First World War knew about this. Did you know the average pilot lasted for only 3 or 4 weeks? Survival was not just down to being very skillful, because that wasn't enough. Every day there'd be a fear that would leave its mark on them. In fact, the historian John Keegan says these words, they had this fixed, narrowed gaze of men in a state of controlled fear every time they jump into their planes and fly off. Imagine saying, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, to them. You've heard that expression, haven't you? Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Is it really true? Do you know where it came from? It was actually Nietzsche, the philosopher, who actually went mad, who actually had this idea and said it this way. But he's also the guy that believed in superhumans, brutal superhumans, that Hitler adopted as part of his ideas for a greater humanity. So does it really make sense for us to say, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger? I bet for a lot of those pilots it was more of a case of whatever it doesn't kill you the first time and come back and kill you the second time. And it was true for them. See, because life is dangerous, discouraging, disappointing, and isn't in our control. And so the Bible says to us, it makes sense to be afraid. Now, one man who knew what it was like to be afraid was a guy called Elijah. He was an Old Testament prophet, and he knew what it was like to experience danger, difficulties, disappointment, and life was out of control. We can come across this best when we look at 1 Kings chapter 19. Let me just go backwards a little bit to see what happened first. You see, what's happened is he's gone to the king at the time called a King Ahab, and he said it's not going to rain anymore because God is so angry. Because King Ahab had a wife called Jezebel, and Jezebel had brought in all these false prophets, and the false prophets had been doing disgusting things to their so-called god Baal. And God was really angry, and so he sent Elijah to show that he was going to judge them. And then he sent Elijah a second time to prove that he was the all-powerful God. And then Elijah set up this test on a mount called Mount Carmel. And the false prophets of Baal got together, 450 of them, and they tried to do a sacrifice where they were going to try and get fire to come down from heaven to burn up their sacrifice by praying to Baal. And no matter what they did, no matter how much they shouted and cried out in their prayers, nothing happened. And then Elijah got his sacrifice, and he said, you watch and see this. Covered it with water, prayed to the living God, and fire came down from heaven, burnt up the sacrifice, even though it was covered in water. Everybody knew that God, the living God, the God of the Bible, was in control. And everybody knew that Elijah was his true prophet. At that point, you would think that he wouldn't have any fears at all, because everybody would be backing him and supporting him. And then he prays to the living God that the rains will come down, the drought will stop, and the rains come down. And all of the drought is just a memory. And you think, double reason for him to feel super confident. But you know what happens? He becomes terrified. Queen Jezebel sends a message to him saying, I am going to have you killed. And he knows that there's real power behind it. 1 Kings chapter 19. When Ahab got home, he told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah, may the gods strike me and even kill me, if by this time tomorrow I've not killed you just as you killed them. Elijah was afraid and he fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the wilderness, travelling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I'm no better than my ancestors, for I've already died. Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. Imagine if you had a friend and the friend was going to meet his ex-wife. He's worried about meeting her, he knows there's going to be dramas, knows there's going to be arguments, and he's fearful. So what he does is before he goes in, rolls up a quick cigarette, lights it, smokes it to relax himself, calm himself down, then off he goes in to meet his ex-wife. Now the thing is, in this illustration, what should he be fearing most? Meeting his ex-wife or smoking the cigarette? Which is more likely to be causing him the greater harm? Which is more dangerous for him? Has he got his fears misplaced? So here we have Elijah in chapter 19. He's under that broom tree. He's fearing for his life, even though amazing things have happened in the previous chapter, proving the power of God and proving that he was a true prophet from God. Yet he gets 3 things right. He recognises the power of Jezebel when in verse 2 Jezebel says, may the gods strike me and even kill me, if by this time tomorrow I've not killed you, just as you've killed them, that her prophets. She has the power to be able to do this. She's killed other people before. He also recognises the danger. It's a real threat here. She's serious about this. And thirdly, he recognises the need to go to a place of safety. And he runs off to be under the broom tree. But you see, just like the cigarette analogy, it's a misplaced fear. He's failed to see that there is a bigger fear and a smaller fear. He's failed to see the bigger power behind the smaller power. You see, he didn't recognise the power behind the power, which is God. That actually Jezebel wasn't in control, God was. He should have feared God. Pilate made the same mistake, and Jesus had to correct him when Pilate said that he had full control, and Jesus said, "You have no power over me at all unless it were given to you from above." We find that in John chapter 19 verse 11. And the Pharisees made the same mistake. They were afraid of the threat of Jesus' popularity and influence, but they weren't afraid of his authority as the one in control who would one day judge the whole world and them. They had the wrong fear. And you notice how Elijah went to a place of safety, but the wrong place of safety. You see, the safe place is always coming to God and sitting under his will. That is where he's obeyed, and that's where he promises that we will be safe. Everywhere else has always been dangerous. Ever since Adam and Eve made the whole world dangerous, the one safe place has been sitting under the will of God in obedience. It's now a few months on from when I was rushed off to A&E with that heart attack. And the Bible doesn't promise that I'll no longer have fears like that again. And yet the Bible does have something to say about my fears. It tells me that my starting point with all my fears is to look at the power behind all those powerful fears. And that power is God. The only one who is in control, and the only one who can ever keep me safe. Jesus himself said these words, "Do not fear those who can kill your body, but fear God who can destroy both body and soul in hell." This is why, to really understand fear, we need to understand the fear of the Lord.